everyone and welcome. So as I promised in one of my previous videos, I am finally going to rank all the books that I read in the second quarter of the year or in summer in this one. Now if you have missed that previous video, that was basically a mid-year check-in where I go over all my stats and goals that I have either really neglected or did quite well on in the second quarter of the year, as well as the ongoing series that I'm currently in the middle of and the books that I still want to read towards the end of the year. Now if you've missed that one, I will link it up in the cards above. If you've seen that video, then you also know that in the second quarter of the year I read a total of 18 books. However, I will only rank 17 in this video because one of those books was a reread, and that was Bloodsong by Anthony Ryan. I loved this book in 2020. This was one of my top 10 books of that year, and upon reread I loved it even more, but I don't think that it's fair to rank rereads where you already have expectations going in comparison to the books that you picked up for the first time. So of course this would rank in the higher end of the list if I would include it, but I'm not going to. And then in the second quarter of the year, I also had a DNF, unfortunately. That one was Skullshorn by Brian Staveley. This was actually one of my 5-star predictions, so I was very disappointed, and that's why I DNF'd it. As you can see, I got around halfway. So was this the worst book that I picked up in the second quarter of the year? No, it's not, but it was my biggest disappointment. It's just a book that wasn't what I was expecting at all, and that's why I DNF'd it. So based on the first half of the book, it would of course rank on the lower half of this list, but since I haven't read it in completion, I don't think that it's fair to include it. So without further ado, let's rank the 17 books that I have completed and read for the first time, from least favorite to most favorite. So if you've seen one of my wrap-ups where I talk about this book, and I will link all the wrap-ups down below because I go a little bit deeper into my thoughts in those videos compared to these ones, then it's not really a surprise that my least favorite book of the second quarter is The Once and Future Witches by Alex E. Harrow. So I didn't really like anything of this book apart from the buddy read that I was doing for this one, which is why I didn't DNF it. Basically, you follow 3 strong sisters, each having very unique traits, but I think that this was very ill-performed in a way that I couldn't really care about any of the sisters. It has the feminist theme, but again, the way that it was executed, I didn't like at all. And the plot, it was very clear from the beginning what was going to happen, so even there wasn't any tension. So of course, I'm not going to like it. The writing style was beautiful, and that's the only positive, but yeah, my least favorite one, and one that I would have DNF'd if it wasn't a buddy read. Then another disappointment, unfortunately, and that's Trader's Moon by Lynn Llewellyn, so the third book in the Night Runner series. I just didn't like this one because there was a lot of political intrigue, and I feel like, again, this was very poorly executed up to a point that I didn't care about the political intrigue, but also that it was very difficult to follow because of the names that all of these characters had. I know that a lot of people talk about fantasy and joke about the almost impossible names to remember that a lot of characters have in general, but in this one, it was taken too far, and I couldn't care less, to be honest. I did listen to this on audiobook, which is why I continued, but other than that, yeah, I think that this was just not a good book in general, and I do hope that the series gets better after this one. Next up we have sci-fi, and that is Iron Gold by Pierce Brown, so the fourth one in the Red Rising series. If you've seen my review for the Red Rising trilogy, then you know that I loved the second and the third book. This one I didn't really like that much. First of all, it's multiple POV, while the original Red Rising trilogy was one POV, the one of Darrow. And here you have multiple, but one of them is Darrow. Now, I didn't really care for the story in this one. I think that I liked the story for the original one a lot more. And I didn't care for any of the POVs besides Darrow. So I would have liked it more if this was still one POV. Or if you had multiple POVs, but Darrow wasn't one of them, so they were all new and you had more of a new start of a trilogy than just the extension of one that was already there but then changed a couple of things. I thought that was weird. I do hope that the second one is better, but this one I didn't like too much. Then we get to books that I actually enjoyed, and the first one is Stalking Darkness, again by Lynn Llewellyn, so this is the second one in the trilogy. I do think that this is the one that I liked most of all. You have a little bit more of the character development and the relationship between the two main characters, so Alec and Sergel, which I liked, and in this one the plot was most clear to follow and also most enjoyable. I also liked that you had a little bit more female main characters in this one in comparison to the first one. So this one was my favorite of the first trilogy, and I do hope that, like I said before, the fourth one and everything after that gets better, because I actually have the complete 10 books of the series, so I do hope that it gets better than the third one, because I wasn't really liking that one that much. But the second one was fine. It's nothing completely special in my opinion, but it was fine and I enjoyed reading it. And then we have A Court of Mist and Fury by Sarah J. Maas. So this one I actually did enjoy. Of course, this is fantasy romance. So if you don't like the romance, you're not going to like it that much in general. And I think that A Court of Mist and Fury has a better romance than the first book in the ACOTAR series, so I like this one a lot better. Also, while the first one was pretty predictable, pretty tropey, nothing really special, I think that here there were some twists and turns that I wasn't expecting, and I think that the plot in general was better. Also, the character development was better, where in the first one, everyone was pretty straightforward, there wasn't really a lot of character development. In this one, you do have a main character with trauma, and how she deals with it, I found enjoyable to read. I don't think that this has very extraordinary writing style or anything like that, but just in general, it was a very enjoyable book, and for fantasy romance, why do you want to read it? Because of the romance, and I liked it in this one. Then I have the first book in the Faithful and the Fallen series by John Gwynne, so Malice. And this one I actually quite enjoyed. I didn't really know what to expect. A lot of people said that it's very plot driven, and I think in this first book it's still okay. And you do have a lot of characters, you follow a lot of different POVs. It's a little bit lower on the list because that made it very difficult to follow in the beginning. Who's who, keep remembering that, so it took me a while to get invested in the story. However, I think that it's a good book, and it's that traditional fantasy that I just enjoy in general. I think, spoiler alert, towards the third book, it's getting a little bit too much plot and not a lot of character development, so that's why it's going a little bit downhill. But this first one, I quite enjoyed. It's nothing special, it's just traditional fantasy, but it was okay. Next up, I have the conclusion of the General Enchanter series, so Merlin Redux by Dave Duncan. These are quite thin books that I've enjoyed for what they are. Like I said, these are very short stories, so you're not going to have a lot of world building or a lot of character development, but in general, these were just very enjoyable to read. So this is historical fantasy set a little bit before and throughout the Crusades, and the thing that I loved most of all is that Dave Duncan, so the author, knows a lot about English history, and he implemented that very well in these books. So I have a review for the entire trilogy if you want to know more, but in general, these are very quick reads that are just enjoyable to read, and you're not going to think about it afterwards. That's why it's not that high on the list. In general, smaller books are not going to make me think about them afterwards as much, so that's why. But for what they are, I've enjoyed them and I would recommend them. So then I have Valor by John Gwynne, the second one in the Faithful and the Fallen series. Everything that I said for Malice still applies here. I do think that I like this one a little bit better just because some of the character development that you do have in this series happens with my favorite character, so Corbin. Then you have some POVs that I didn't really enjoy that weren't in this book anymore, and we have some new POVs that I quite enjoyed. So that's why it's a little bit higher. My major disappointment with this series is that I think that the writing style is a little bit mediocre, especially the conversations should have been done better. I think that there's also a lot of telling and not showing, which I in general do not enjoy, but this is definitely something different than what I normally read. It's much more plot driven than character driven, so that it can still hold my attention does mean something, that it's quite a good series. And like I said, the third one is a little bit iffy at this point, but Valor was a decent read. And then we get to a section of books that I actually enjoyed a little bit better than the previous section that I discussed, and the first one in this is Sister Song by Lucy Holland. So this is a fantasy standalone, it's actually historical fantasy, and this one you also follow three very strong siblings, just as in the Once and Future Witches. But here I think that it's executed a lot better. Where here, for instance, you also have very important themes that are being discussed. One of the siblings is transgender and wants to be recognized as a son, for instance, which I quite enjoyed, but here it was just handled so much better and a little bit less on the nose that I enjoyed it just a lot more. Also, the character development was, again, just better in this one. The romance was better in this one, and you just didn't really have the feeling that everything was going to end up okay. So you kept feeling that tension throughout the story. While in The Once and Future Witches, I didn't have that tension. I knew that everything was going to be fine. So that's why I enjoyed this one a lot more. Also, you have the historical fantasy where you take place, I think, in early medieval England. And you also have nature-based magic, stuff like that. So I just enjoyed this one a lot more and I would recommend it. Then we have The Dragon Republic by R.F. Kuang, so the second one in the Poppy War trilogy. I think that during my wrap-up, I said that I didn't know if I liked this one or the Poppy War better, but after some time has passed, I definitely liked the Poppy War better. I think that this one was very enjoyable to read, but it depends on where you like Rin as a main character to be, and I just enjoyed her more in the first one, where you also have her mentor in the school-like setting, and then you have her mentor in the second part of the book as well. And here that's not as present anymore, so I definitely enjoyed what was happening here, but a little bit less than the Poppy War. Also, some twist that happens in this one I didn't really find that believable or well executed, that I think if I would reread the trilogy, I would have some issues knowing that that twist would come and not find the build-up that logical. So that's why it's not as high as I would rate the Poppy War, which is an all-time favorite at this point, but still a very nice second in the trilogy. Then another historical fantasy book, and that is The Last Queen by Signy Pike. This is the first one in a trilogy, and I quite enjoyed this one. I always say Signy Pike is like Juliette Merlier. I don't think that she quite hits the same quality as her, both in terms of storytelling as in terms of writing style, but it's very similar, and I think if you like one, that you will like the other as well, where you have a very strong female character, you have nature-based magic. This is also very much historical fantasy, where you actually follow the sister of the person on whom Merlin, or the story of Merlin, was based upon. So I quite enjoyed this one, and I hope that the second one will be as good. Then we have Morning Star by Pierce Brown. So a couple of books ago I talked about the original Red Rising trilogy and that I quite enjoyed this. This is the conclusion, so of course I would like it. I liked all of the twists and turns that we had in this one, the pacing, the relationship that shifts a little bit between different characters, but I liked it less than the second book in the series, just of where Darrow is in this one, based and compared to where he is in the second book. And also something happens in this one that just should never happen with first-person books, or books that use first person as a narrative. So that's why it's lower, but still a very enjoyable read. And because I enjoyed it that much, at the point that that happened, I could brush past it and not be as agitated with it as I would have been if that mistake would have been made in another book. But yeah, that definitely happens here. So if you've read it, you know what happens, because this is what everybody complains about in this series, that this happened in the third book, but I still think that it was a very good conclusion. Speaking of good endings, the next one is The Last Argument of Kings by Joe Abercrombie. So this is of course the conclusion of the First Law trilogy, and I quite enjoyed the entire trilogy. I also enjoyed the third book, and I think that I liked the overall ending. I'm quite happy with what happened there and how everything was tied up. I didn't like the last 5 pages of the book, and I would have liked to see that that was handled other or differently. I don't think that saying it should have been handled better is correct, because this was just a choice of the author. And it's something that I personally don't like, but it's not that it's something that shouldn't have been done. And I know that a lot of people actually did like it. It's a little bit of an open ending with one certain character that I would have seen differently. However, everything else up until that point was amazing. I think that the fighting scenes were amazing in this one. I didn't like one certain thing that happened with the seed, if you know what I mean. But other than that, a great conclusion, and I do want to continue with the entire series as a whole, starting with the standalones, of course. So I just talked about the conclusion of the Red Rising trilogy. Next up I have Golden Sun, which is the second book in the Red Rising trilogy, and in my opinion the best one in the trilogy. So this one definitely doesn't suffer from middle book syndrome. I loved how surprised I was when I picked up this one after Red Rising, because Red Rising I didn't like that much, and then this one is one of the best books that I've read this year. It's amazing, it's twist upon twist, it's something that I didn't expect at all. I love Darrow's role in this middle book, so yeah. My favorite sci-fi book that I've read up until this point, so that says a lot. So now we're getting into my top 3, and if you know the kind of books that I've been reading for the last couple of months, then it's no surprise what these 3 books are, I suppose. But the third one is Fool's Errand by Robin Hobb, which is the first book in the Tawny Man trilogy, which is the third trilogy in the Realm of the Elderlings, and in this one we're back with Fitz. I enjoyed this one so much. It's a very quest-like story in the second half of the book, but the first half of the book is just really calm, it's really slow, it's just getting back to Fitz, seeing what he's been doing for the last 15 years, how he's living now, and him being reintroduced to some of his old friends, which I loved. So it could be too slow for some people, but if you're invested with Fitz and with his life, which a lot of people who love the Realm of the Elderlings are, then you're just happy to read what he's been doing, even if it's slow and even if it's not that eventful. In the second half of the book, it's more quest-like I said, and you have a new character. Now, I was first very annoyed with that new character. After a while, I've come to love him, but in the beginning, I was really annoyed by him. So I really liked this book, and of course, it's Robin Hobb, it's a 5-star, it's an all-time favorite. Everything, almost everything for in the Realm of the Elderlings up to this point has been. And then on my number 2, a book by another one of my favorite authors, and that is The Dark Mirror by Juliette Merlier. So this is one of her earlier works. It's not the first book that she's written, but it's very close in timing to when she wrote Daughter of the Forest, which is my favorite book of all time. And I think that this was very close to that, where you have a very strong female character. I enjoyed reading her chapters a lot, but this one is actually two POVs where you also have a male character that you follow. And I really liked going back and forth. This was actually one where I liked these both POVs and I wasn't disappointed when I went to one or the other. So that's definitely a plus. And I liked how their relationship developed. Other than that, of course, it's Juliette Merlier. You're going to have historical fantasy, nature-based magic, all of that good stuff. So I really like that one. And I really want to continue with the second book in the trilogy because I have heard that this is a lot of fans' favorite in that trilogy. So my hopes are high. And then my favorite book for the second quarter of the year, and maybe my favorite book that I've read up until this point, or up until the end of June, and that is Golden Fool by Robin Hobb, so the second book in the Tawny Man trilogy. I like this one a little bit more than the first one because you have more enjoyable characters. I feel like more happens in this book than in the first book, and I feel like it acts as a bridge between the Life Ship Traders trilogy, which is the second book in the second series in the realm of the Elderlings, and the books that revolve around Fitz. Because you do have some characters of the Life Ship Traders that make an appearance in this one. And you also have a very big tension or build-up towards the third book in the trilogy. So I like that one as well. It's Fitz, it's Robin Hobb, it's my favorite book in the realm of the Elderlings up until this point, so that's why it's number one. Even though, spoiler alert, by this time I have already read the third one in the trilogy and that is now my favorite book in the entire realm of the Elderlings. But this one is very good, and if you like the Farseer trilogy, then I would advise you to first read the Life Ship Traders trilogy and then go to the Tawny Man, just because you have that tie-in. And I think that a lot of maybe some Easter eggs would just fly over your head and you wouldn't even know that you've missed it, but it would make the story not as good as when you have read the Life Ship Traders trilogy first. But yeah. Amazing book, amazing series. I love Robin Hobb. So those were all of the 17 books that I've read in the second quarter of the year, completely ranked. Let me know if you've read any of these, and also let me know how your second quarter of the year has been. Have you discovered some new all-time favorites that I need to check out as well? Or like me, did you have some disappointments, maybe even a DNF? Let me know in the comments down below. As always, I hope that you enjoyed the video and see you next time. Bye!